Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special. In this video we'll be looking at antibiotic resistant bacteria. So this is linked in with the topic of natural selection and evolution, and we could ask the question, does evolution still happen today? Well, the answer to that is yes, and it's very scary. Bacteria could once again kill large numbers of people across the planet, and your doctor might not be able to help. And the reason for this is an overuse of antibiotics. So this is all to do with a particular nasty strain of bacteria called MRSA, which stands for methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and you can just refer to this as MRSA. This is an antibiotic resistant bacteria that has evolved by natural selection and been spread around the world through many hospitals by poor sanitation. The MRSA was spread due to poor hygiene and doctors and nurses going from patient to patient and not washing their hands. MRSA was a particularly big problem between 1994 and 2006. In the early 21st century, MRSA contributed to 1,000 deaths every year in UK hospitals and care homes. The rates of MRSA infections have been reducing in recent years, and this is due to a range of simple measures, some of which were first suggested by Semmelweis in the 19th century. Hospitals need to have high standards of hygiene to stay really clean. Medical staff should wash their hands with soap and water or alcohol between patients. Medical staff should wear disposable clothing or clothing that can be sterilised. Antibiotics should only be used when they're really needed, and specific antibiotics should be used to treat specific bacterial infections, not what are known as broad-spectrum antibiotics. Patients who have antibiotic-resistant infections should be treated in isolation, and visitors should wash their hands when they enter and leave a hospital. So how does antibiotic resistance happen? Well, you've got a couple of little diagrams here that show the general process, but this occurs due to the process of natural selection. So if we take a look at Staphylococcus aureus, which is a bacteria, and you can see that here under the microscope, and you can also see the effect it can have on your body. Now, this bacteria is harmless if your immune system is strong, so if you're a normal person, but in the very young and the very old, it can kill you. And if you do have an infection of this particular bacteria, then yes, you can take antibiotics. However, the overuse of these antibiotics has caused a big problem. Now, this bacteria lives naturally on the skin of most people, around the entrance to your nose, for example. However, if it gets from the skin and inside your tissues, into your muscle tissues and organ tissues, then it releases a toxin which in effect breaks down the glue that holds the skin onto the muscles and the muscles onto the bones. So your skin begins to flake off, your muscle begins to flake off, and eventually can actually expose the bones underneath. As I say, it's not a problem for most people because your immune system will destroy it. But in the very young and very old, they may need help and assistance from antibiotics. But the overuse has caused a massive problem. Let me explain. If this is one Staphylococcus bacteria, like all bacteria, it will reproduce rapidly to produce 2, 4, 8, 16, and eventually a population of many millions of individual bacterial cells. But if you look at my graphic here, I've shown that the colour has changed, and that's to show that within this population you will have variation. Not every individual cell will be identical. And when doctors introduce the environmental change of adding an antibiotic, in this case the antibiotic methicillin, the methicillin will work to kill almost all those bacteria. But if just one bacteria happens to have a gene or an allele which provides resistance to that antibiotic, then it will survive in the new environment. It will have an advantage. And therefore, it will be able to breed and pass on that advantage to the next generations. And so we will now have a population which are completely resistant to our antibiotic. In this case, methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So how does this occur? How can we summarize this process and make certain that we're going to get all the marks in an exam? Well, it's the same basic paragraph that you hopefully have seen before in terms of describing natural selection. We begin with the environmental change. Doctors give out too many antibiotics and the environment that bacteria live in changes. Then we discuss the variation. We state that there is variation in the bacteria population, and then we discuss the advantage. Bacteria that are not killed by the antibiotics will have an advantage over bacteria that are killed by the antibiotics. They are more likely to survive and breed and pass on those alleles for antibiotic resistance to their offspring. And over time, these alleles will become more common. One other thing you can mention with a paragraph like this when talking specifically about MRSA is that MRSA is spread when doctors and nurses and patients and visitors to hospitals do not wash their hands regularly. So antibiotic resistance evolves as a result of changes in the environment and mutations. Mutations occur naturally in the DNA of individual bacterial cells, and this causes new alleles, new variation within the population. When the antibiotics are taken, this causes the environment to change, and any bacterial cells that have a mutation that causes antibiotic resistance will have an advantage in this new environment. Non-resistant cells will be killed, and only the resistant bacteria will survive to breed and pass on the antibiotic-resistant allele. Soon, the whole population of bacteria cells will be resistant to the antibiotic. Whichever species of bacteria this occurs in will spread rapidly in the human population because nobody is immune and there will be no effective treatment. This is why it's quite a scary thing to consider that in the future we may have antibiotics which are less effective than they are today. So how do we prevent more antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria? Well, first and foremost, do not overuse antibiotics. Doctors do not prescribe antibiotics for non-serious infections such as ear or throat infections. Do not use antibiotics for viral infections. This is because viruses are found inside human cells where the antibiotics can't reach them. Also, many antibiotics will work by destroying bacterial cell walls. Well, viruses don't have cell walls. So therefore, antibiotics will be ineffective against viruses. You will only be changing the environment and creating the conditions for natural selection to occur and for antibiotic resistance to evolve. Lastly, you must finish the course of antibiotics if you are prescribed them. This ensures that all the bacteria cells in the population are killed by the antibiotics. The most resistant bacteria cells are likely to be the last to be destroyed. No mutated bacteria will remain to form resistant strains. We should also consider restricting the use of antibiotics in agriculture. It's important to restrict the agricultural use of antibiotics, and this is to prevent the spread of antibiotic resistance from animal to animal or from animal pathogens to human pathogens. In the UK, we already have many restrictions in place. However, other countries are not so careful. In the US, 70% of human antibiotics are also used on farm animals, often used to speed up growth or to prevent rather than cure infections. And once again, it changes the environment that the bacteria live in and creates the conditions whereby antibiotic resistance may evolve. So if we can't use antibiotics in the future, what could we use to replace them? Well, this is a study of future medicines. Recently, doctors have found strains of bacteria that are resistant to even the strongest antibiotics. If a doctor cannot use antibiotics to treat a patient's infection, then the patient is likely to die. So scientists are looking for new chemicals with antibiotic properties. These chemicals must destroy bacterial cells without harming human cells. Penicillin, which was the first antibiotic, is made by fungi. Other potential sources of antibiotics include crocodile blood, fish slime, and soil samples. Development of antibiotics is expensive and slower than the evolution of new antibiotic-resistant strains. So this could be a losing battle that we are fighting. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you have, don't forget to like and subscribe. Comment below and let me know what you've learned from this video. Thank you very much for your time.